Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is an introduction to modernism. Modernism is actually kind of my jam. It's one of my main things. I've done quite a bit of writing about it, and probably the most enjoyment I get out of literature tends to be modernism. So, this phase that we're moving into in this class is kind of exciting to me. Um, so modernism is this global movement that happened starting around, like you could say, the late 1890s or sometime in the 1890s and up until approximately 1945. 1945 is always a good cutoff because that's the end of World War II, where again we had a big change happening. But so basically the first half of the 20th century. Um, this movement is huge. It spans like not just literature, but also art and philosophy and architecture and pretty much anything you can think of. Um, the world was entering this era of high technology that was really fast moving. The old ways and the traditions just kind of seemed to be falling away, and the world was looking to a future that nobody could even imagine. It was kind of a unique time in history because it was probably maybe the first time in history where the world was heading into this whole new era, and everyone knew that we were. So the fact that it was so apparent that we knew it, I think, adds some poignancy to this modernist movement. So electricity was building up speed as far as how many people it was affecting, and it was becoming ubiquitous really, really fast. Automobiles were being invented and starting to be manufactured. There were huge breakthroughs in science and in medicine. Global trade was happening, which ended up being in some ways a highly evil thing, but also changed lifestyles for so many people in the world, especially in the more developed world, right? um, in the earlier part, or the first half maybe, of the modernist movement, we're having a build-up to war, and in the early part, we were building up to the Great War, which we later started calling World War One. And then modernism kind of went during the buildup of that war, through that war, into the sort of uneasy peace between the world wars, and then all the way through World War II. So this is a time of world upheaval. We're coming off of this romantic era and this sort of like Victorian culture where everything was very formal, very traditional. Modernism comes in and challenges all traditions and all forms. Like, by definition, by principle, modernism is defying form and genre. There's a lot of like experimentation for the sake of experimentation. This idea that you don't need to honor the old ways. There's kind of a hyper focus on the individual. What is an individual's psychology? What is the inner experience? What is a unique consciousness like? How can each individual move away from a traditional society and make it into something completely new? These are obsessions that modernism had. Um, so, like I said, this includes a lot of things that aren't just literature. It includes philosophy. So we had a lot of new types of philosophy beginning, like existentialism, absurdism, things like that, right? Um, the idea that only the individual can really interpret their own meaning, and that includes things like morality. Like morality has to be individually interpreted. In the art movement, the visual art movement, there were things like cubism, surrealism, abstraction, again, absurdism. So, the cubism of Pablo Picasso, sorry, would be, this idea that instead of having one view on something, Picasso wanted to give you multiple views of the same thing at the same time. And that's why you see all these strange eyes facing in different directions, and the strange, almost two-dimensional rendering of something that looks at least three-dimensional, and it's really kind of disorienting. That's breaking form so that you can see, multiple views at the same time. Surrealism, this type of art that it's dreamlike and it's illogical. Absurdism. Think about, Marcel Duchamp and just taking objects and sticking them on a wall and saying that it's art. So it's a purely conceptual kind of art. All this stuff was going on in the art world and just breaking the art world. Um, Architecture was influenced by modernism, so functionalism. So this was the idea that form had to follow function. So there were a lot of it was a lot of self-conscious, very modern materials like metals and high-grade concretes and things being used. Not a lot of decoration, and just trying to look at what's the function of this building. In science, there was all kinds of stuff going on. So in the early part of the modernist period, Sigmund Freud was creating a whole new kind of science. He was bringing philosophy and sort of personal stakes into the scientific realm with what would become known as psychology. Um, Archaeologists were making discoveries of ancient, civilizations, and we're trying to put together the pieces of history, and we're all kind of confused about it. Um, Isaac Newton's kind of like mechanical version of the universe was being challenged. Albert Einstein was telling us that space and time and reality are just not what we intuitively thought they were. So, the idea of what's a fact and what's not a fact was coming under fire. It's not that they're saying facts didn't exist, but facts are more changeable with time, and in this time, rapidly changeable in a short time than people really had thought of it as being before. Science isn't a static thing. Science is a pathway for us to keep making more discoveries and keep adjusting our old knowledge. So knowledge itself and facts become more unstable than they used to be when people just really depended on tradition. So if I were teaching a whole semester on modernism, I would be showing you all kinds of cultural artifacts outside of literature, and I'd be trying to show the immersive quality of it. But the nature of this class is I've got a very short time to go through modernism, so we'll be really concentrating on literature only. But just be aware that this is happening all over the world and kind of in all modes of life. So in literature, modernism is obsessed with breaking tradition, breaking genres, breaking forms. So, for instance, poetry started using free verse, not wanting to be bound into the normal patterns. A lot of poetry became very abstracted, started using a lot of imagery. In literary prose, there was a lot of stream of consciousness. So William Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, you're seeing this inner dialogue just kind of like running on the page. There was a lot of crazy syntax and grammar that didn't follow traditional grammar rules. So again, Faulkner sort of invented his own patterns of grammar and started using those. Gertrude Stein kind of reinvented syntax and grammar in more of an emotional way than a literal way. And it's really crazy, interesting, and cool stuff that she was creating at this time. Literature was taking another look at realism. So we had just kind of wound up this realist movement, and realism never really goes away, right? But in the modernist movement, the question was, what is real, right? So rather than trying to pursue a kind of realism that explained things exactly as they were in front of your eyes as accurately as possible, the modernist kind of realism was maybe like more real than real. Or, what can I do in this prose to give you the experience of something, not just to describe what's in front of you, but to give you a true feeling of what it truly is. So realism just kind of takes on a whole different tenor, right? There was sort of almost combining of genres too. So there was a lot of poetry that had long lines that almost seemed like prose. There was prose that was poetic to the point where it didn't really sound like storytelling anymore. It sounded more like abstract poetry. Just all kinds of things. So I think a useful term to keep in mind at least for me, is the term decentering. I always think of modernism in literature as attempting to decenter everything. Um, and if you think really hard about modernist literature, it's more like it's trying to express the fact that everything already is decentered. So, what I mean by this is modernism has a real problem with meaning. So, the higher meaning of things always seems to shift or disappear. In the past, tradition would tell us what meaning is, or traditional symbolism would tell us what meaning is. But in modernism, there's this feeling that if we try to really think of what the higher meaning of something is there something at the center of what we're thinking about? It always seems to just disappear, disintegrate. Um, Everything's sort of exposed as being artificial. We're just sort of humans who are making the world up as we go, not experiencing the world as it was pre-existing for us. Um, so meaning isn't very dependable, and so therefore you need to create meaning. You need to make meaning in your own way, and you need to try to make the world new. If you're making the world new, you're putting your impression on it, and you're creating the kind of meaning that you can live in, and hopefully creating the kind of meaning that other people can connect with too. At the same time, the search for meaning is always kind of fruitless. So in modernism, the search for meaning is everything. Everything you do in modernist literature is moving toward trying to figure out what something means. But there's also simultaneously this feeling that you're not going to find the center of meaning ever. Meaning's important, but meaning's also something you can't find. And that's a horrible and exciting tension that's always present in modernist literature. It makes it very exciting to read because the thing that's most important is also the most elusive. There are a lot of just different iterations of modernism in literature also. So a lot of, you could call them subgenres, even though modernism wants to break genre, but I'm just trying to describe it the best I can. So I'll just tell you briefly about just a few of them. There are way more than I'm going to tell you about, but so one subgenre of modernism is futurism. And in futurism, they're trying to capture the fact that everything's moving really fast. They try to get these images of speed and movement. They also have this idea that the past should be destroyed. So we want to move really quickly toward the future and destroy the past in our wake. And it's kind of a destructive, and almost in some ways, almost like a fascistic kind of erasure of history. There are even writers and artists who talk about how they want to burn down all the libraries so we don't have any memory of the past. And so that's a very extreme corner of modernism. And I don't know that anybody was actually serious about this. This was artistic expression they were making, saying we should destroy the past. What's another? So there's another sort of subgenre is imagism. So this is used in poetry, where the poets, I'm talking people like Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, they wanted to reject a linear sense of things. So instead they created these images that were supposed to be like moments in time, or what we might call today snapshots, where we're supposed to understand the world in this non-linear way. Surrealism, of course, it's this sort of dreamlike state, something where things are intentionally illogical to try to jar your brain into thinking about things in other ways. So this was a visual movement, but there were also surrealist writers, and this was largely a French thing. Surrealism seemed to live in France a lot. I don't have any surrealist literature that we're going to be reading in here, but it's something you can think about if you're interested in it. So there's all these different subgenres of modernism, but really it's all about breaking tradition, breaking form, and modernism tends to be very introspective. So there's a lot of work where you're just trying to figure out the self, trying to figure out what's inside. I want to show you just a few examples here, and then I'll talk a little bit more about some specifics of what we'll do in this class. But I mean, I've got a pretty big modernist collection here, and I'll just show you some. So this book I think that people tend to think that modernism is this crazy thing that's incomprehensible. This book is a very nice book um, by Sherwood Anderson, and it's just a series of stories about a small town. What makes this modernist is that it's a series of stories that create one large story at the end. And I really like books like that, and you've probably read some of them. People still do this a lot today, but this represents a huge break in form. This isn't something that was done. So breaking form doesn't have to be radical and scary and destroying the past or technologically advanced. It can be as simple as finding a new way to write a novel. This is one of my favorite books. Mary Borden. This book is called The Forbidden Zone. This is a book about World War One, and it's close to being like a creative nonfiction. There's a lot of her experience in this book. She kind of fictionalizes it, but there's a lot of very abstract language in this book. She was a volunteer in World War II and was nursing soldiers who were coming in injured. And there's a lot of disturbing imagery in here, but it's also surreal. And I've written about this book quite a bit. And I really feel like there's a lot of challenge to what gender means in this book. Very fascinating, breaks all kinds of norms. We have, of course, Virginia Woolf, one of the quintessential modernists. In this class, for the purposes of this class, we won't actually read any Virginia Woolf, but you need to know that Virginia Woolf is one of the top three figures, probably in modernism as far as fame and influence goes. Definitely be thinking about Virginia Woolf. Also, I'm not going to have you read any James Joyce. This is one of the most intimidating books I think that people think of. Ulysses, Stream of Consciousness, and kind of notoriously difficult to read, based on ancient Greek stories. Here's one that's a little bit lesser known, Juna Barnes, this book called Nightwood. This book, I feel like, takes metaphor to an extreme. It takes metaphor in these dizzying circles to describe this particular person. I don't want to give you any spoilers. Then we've got, of course, the poetry. So T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. We will read a little bit of this in class. Particularly, one of my favorite poems is "A Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock." It's a long poem that it's about growing old, but it's very, very introspective. And T.S. Eliot wrote this poem about being old when he was 22, so that's interesting too, right? William Butler Yeats. For this class, we're going to take a look at the poem Second Coming, which is a very short poem. Second Coming by William Butler Yeats is probably, I would almost go so far as to say it's maybe the quintessential poem of modernism. One of my favorite poems ever. I love it. And it's 2 stanzas long, but you could spend a semester studying it if you wanted. Here's Gertrude Stein, who I mentioned. She has this book right here is called Tender Buttons. This is one of those books that really destroys your idea of what grammar and syntax are. And this is to be understood emotionally and not literally. It's crazy and awesome. You should definitely read this. This is not going to be part of our class, though. Then I just want to talk about another sort of movement that's happening at the same time as modernism in the United States only, and that's the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was taking place probably kind of in the middle of when modernism was going on. And there are some incredible books. So I'm sure you've heard of James Baldwin. He was kind of at the tail end of this. But then we've got some people who really made the way for James Baldwin. So here's one of my favorite books. It's called Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And this is about the Black experience. And it doesn't have exactly the same genre breaking. None of these Harlem Renaissance books have quite the same intentional genre breaking things going on as some of these other ones. But what does kind of break things and make them new is they're putting the Black experience at the center of these mainstream novels. And the fact that these novels became like mainstream reading is very modernist in its own way, right? Claude McKay, he was a poet who was responsible for a lot of different publications. And so like there were these like weekly black poetry publications that were coming out that were immensely popular, and he was one of the editors of those. Nella Larson, this is a very interesting book called Passing. It has to do with passing, like when somebody is black and they can sort of pass for not being black, and what that means culturally and what that means to individuals. So that was this Harlem Renaissance was happening at the same time, and normally I would include something in it, but there's another class I teach here where I highly highlight the Harlem Renaissance. So if you ever get to take like 1016 with me, that'll be where I'm spending like probably a good third of the semester on the Harlem Renaissance. So back to just the regular old modernist movement. Modernism also doesn't have to be, I think people get the impression that it has to be really urban and metropolitan and high tech, but that's not true. We've got John Steinbeck here, one of the greatest novels of all time, The Grapes of Wrath, talking about the Depression. And this is largely taking place in a rural context. And then we've got William Faulkner, my favorite writer. And I think I finally have gotten to the point where I can say, yes, William Faulkner is my favorite writer. For this class, we're going to read As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. This also takes place in a rural setting, but this is modernist through and through. So As I Lay Dying, I might as well just I saved this one for last. So I'll just tell you about this because it's relevant to us right now. It has a lot of modernist features. It's got stream of consciousness in it. It reinvents grammar and syntax in really weird, difficult to read ways, but awesome ways. It has sort of like all these different perspectives. It's almost like a dizzying amount of perspectives that happen to show all kinds of different ways that a particular scene unfolds. It has a non-traditional structure where it doesn't use chapters, but it just uses different perspectives over and over again. And so there are a lot of breaks in this book, but it's always a break to go to a different character's perspective. Has overlapping timelines. It has sentences and descriptions of things that are sometimes somewhere between realism and abstract. I just have to say that I love this book so much. I almost get butterflies in my stomach when I read this book. That's how much I love this book. So anyway, you're gonna get to experience that book too, and I hope that you love it. You don't have to, but I hope that you appreciate it because it's fabulous. Think about all these things, all these complicated and sort of competing and nonsensical at times features that these modernist writings have as you're reading. Don't get caught up if you feel disoriented when you're reading these books. There are going to be a lot of parts that are hard to comprehend. Sometimes you might think a whole book is hard to comprehend, but just keep pushing through it. Being disoriented and having a lot of moments of confusion is part of the experience of reading these novels. You have to be a serious literature person to read these novels because you have to put yourself into a situation where you know it's going to be difficult and that you are going to be rewarded for going through this difficult process. Give yourself permission to feel a lot of moments of confusion and just keep pushing through reading anyway. Experiencing these books themselves, especially some of my favorites, are enough reward by the end. Even if you don't get them 100%, you're going to be enriched by them a lot. So I look forward to going through this experience with you. Go into this relaxed with an open mind and just keep reading. And good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.